Good day, everyone. I am Jelen Emil Turano, and my presentation is entitled Human Security Implications of Sea Level Rise to Low-Lying and Coastal Communities in the Philippines. So the outline of my presentation are the following. So we will be discussing about the objectives of my presentation, and then we will tackle what is sea level rise, then the human security dimensions of SLR, adaptation strategies, and I will be citing one case in Bohol, Philippines, then the national strategies toward addressing climate change, some recommendations, and conclusion. So the objectives of my presentation are the following. So first, to identify the human security dimensions of SLR to low-lying and coastal communities in the Philippines, determine measures being implemented and or being developed at the national and or local levels to address the impacts of SLR, and lastly, provide key recommendations to further strengthen climate change adaptation actions in relating to addressing sea level rise in the country, especially to low-lying and coastal communities. So what is sea level rise? So climate change is real and it is felt globally and locally. In fact, it is considered as one of the most pressing issues of the 21st centuries. And sea level rise is one of the anthropogenic impacts of climate change governed by thermal expansion of the seawater and the melting of ice sheets and glaciers into the ocean. So given the archipelagic nature of the Philippines, it is extremely sensitive to climate change impacts such as rising sea levels, increased frequency of extreme weather events, rising temperature, and heavy rainfall. So figure on the right side of your screen shows the different impacts of climate change experienced in the different regions. So as you can see, almost all regions experience sea level rise. So majority of the country's population reside within the 60-kilometer of the coast. So Filipinos also have one of the highest per capita fish consumption of 23 to 43 kilograms per year. And the fisheries and fisheries associated livelihoods are one of the main economic sectors of the Philippine society. So these combined natural exposure and enhanced reliance on the coastal system makes the Philippines highly vulnerable to climate change, specifically to sea level rise. Furthermore, the vulnerability of the Philippine coasts to SLR is attributed to both physical and socioeconomic factors, according to Perez et al. In 1999. So for instance, these factors include excessive groundwater withdrawals, especially in major urban centers such as Metro Manila. And then there is also beach mining as that in La Union, and coastal modifications as that in Banabang Molino Balayan Coast in Batangas, and mangrove removal as in Kampupong River also in Batangas. And in the projections of Kahana et al. In 2016, it shows that sea level in the Philippines increases faster than the global average due to the gravitational influences produced by mass loss from the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, as well as melting of the glaciers. So hence, sea level rise is already a hazard to coastal regions and populations in the country, and it will become a stronger force in the future, contributing to coastal flooding, shoreline erosion, and salinization of freshwater aquifers. Also, in the risk assessment in the Philippines conducted by Perez et al., they found that parts of Cavite, Bulacan, and Metro Manila, which are located along the coast of Manila Bay, could succumb to a 1-meter sea level rise by 2100. Lastly, in a more recent report by the Asian Development Bank in 2017, wherein they identified 19 of the 25 cities most vulnerable to a 1-meter increase are in Asia and the Pacific, and 7 of them are in the Philippines. So these cities include Manila, Taguig, Caloocan, Davao, Butuan, Malabon, and Iloilo. So based on the report also, if climate change continues to be unabated, Asia would experience a 6 degrees Celsius temperature increase by the end of the century. Now let's talk about the human security dimensions of sea level rise. So definitions of human security vary according to discipline. And in the context of climate change, Adger et al. Defines human security as a condition that exists when the vital core of human lives is protected and when people have the freedom and capacity to live with dignity. So many phenomena influence human security, including markets, the state and its policies, and even the existing civil societies. So there is also poverty, discrimination of many kinds, and extreme natural and technological disasters which undermine human security. So although climate change affects everyone, regardless of race, caste, nationality, sex, or income level, it will always be the poor nations, communities, and individuals who will bear the brunt of its effects, and climate change will exacerbate already existing inequities. And specifically for SLR, its social and cultural consequences are only being studied recently, notably in terms of how resource use will be affected and how these changes may affect social connections and belief systems about traditional habitats. And current talks of adaptation to sea level rise sometimes portray adaptation as a simple process free of false starts, discontinuities, disputes, or disorientation, according to Oliver Smith in 2009. So some of the identified human security dimensions of SLR are the following. First, we have gender inequality. So gender disparity has just lately become a focus in climate change research. And the subject of sea-related dangers, particularly SLR, is still mostly investigated in the context of developing countries, despite increased interest in wealthier countries. So according to the IPCC in 2019, as a result of, among other things, traditions, social conventions, and patriarchy, gender imbalance may be inherent in unfavorable backdrop conditions. And then we also have the possibility of loss of indigenous and local knowledge. So indigenous knowledge and local knowledge are both a foundation for and an outcome of traditional resource management systems aimed at regulating resource use and ensuring critical ecosystem protection. Structuring the relationship between people and authorities, and framing and maintaining a strong sense of place in the community. So according to the IPCC 2019, given that indigenous knowledge and local knowledge are largely based on observing and making sense of the surrounding environment, losing both reflect a broader concern about the deterioration of environmental connectedness in contemporary societies, which is not limited to remote, rural, and developing communities. Then we also have the possibility of water shortages. Shrinking glaciers and rising sea levels will pose new risks for human security. The retreat of glaciers will also threaten short-term flooding and long-term declines in water availability across Asia, Latin America, and parts of East Africa. So rising sea levels will also reduce the availability of fresh water, affecting millions of people in low-lying countries and river deltas. The estimate of the IPCC is that these changes will also put hundreds of millions of people at risk of water shortages. Next, we have dropping or absence of children from school. So a child's access to education is closely linked to the breakdown of social and economic structures. So for example, in the case of Azerbaijan, um, study of Kudas as cited by Dokos et al. Found that there was a very significant drop in school attendance owing to the rising sea level. And focus groups conducted with residents indicated that relocation of the schools due to sea level rise together with deteriorating health of the children, fleeing of the teachers due to economic reasons and financial problems of the family were the primary reasons for the drop in school attendance. Lastly, we have increased migration and displacement. So climate-related stressors in combination with ecosystem change, such as sea level rise and rapid onset catastrophes, such as flooding, have the potential to induce migration or force national governments to plan for the evacuation and resettlement of displaced people. So for example, in the Philippines, there were about 4 million people displaced in 2013 due to Typhoon Haiyan. So that was according to Loom and Maragason, as cited by the ADB in 2017. So let me cite one case, which is in the municipality of Tubigon in Bohol, wherein they were the communities opted to adopt to sea level rise. So in the study of Hamero in 2019, they looked into the adaptation strategies of select low-lying islands, and one of their area of study is the municipality of Tubigon in Bohol province in the Philippines. Four adjoining island villages in the municipality of Tubigon experienced land subsidence and began to experience tidal flooding during regular high tides after the 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which they experienced in 2013. So prior to the earthquake, these islands only experienced tidal flooding when major typhoons struck. So according to the authors, although the local government of Tubigon has attempted to evacuate the settlements to the mainland, residents have remained on the islands despite the inconvenience caused by the tidal floods, because it is where their livelihoods come from. So some of the adaptation strategies opted by the communities in the municipality of Tubigon and the islands in Tubigon are the following. So as you can see, they adopted via raising their roads, elevating their belongings, repairing their classrooms. They had stilted their houses. They had raised their floors, and also some of them made plastic benches. So there were also ecosystem-based adaptation measures such as planting of mangroves and coral reefs, and coastal engineering such as seawalls. Now, what are the national strategies towards addressing climate change and its impacts, including SLR? So the Philippines, as one of the world's most vulnerable countries, is committed to addressing the threat of climate change. It has developed legal and institutional structures for climate change adaptation and mitigation to accomplish its national development goals and international commitments. So for one, the Climate Change Commission was established within the Office of the President by virtue of the Climate Change Act of 2009, RA 9729. It is the government's primary climate policymaking body, entrusted with coordinating, monitoring, and evaluating the government's climate change initiatives and action plans. So the Climate Change Act was revised in 2012 by Republic Act 10174, which established the People's Survival Fund to offer long-term climate finance for climate adaptation projects by LGUs and people's organizations. Then we have the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change, which you can see at the right side of your screen. So the NSFCC lays the groundwork for national and local policies aimed at creating a climate-resilient Philippines with healthy, safe, prosperous, and self-sufficient communities, as well as thriving and productive ecosystems. So the NSFCC also highlights that adaptation, or I mean mitigation, will always be a function of adaptation. Then we also have the National Climate Action Plan. So the NCCAP provides the Philippines adaptation and mitigation strategy for the years 2011 to 2028. So it emphasizes public finance that prioritizes adaptation for vulnerable and marginalized populations, as well as policies that promotes the private sector to maximize mitigation potential for long-term growth. So we have food security, water sufficiency, ecological and environmental sustainability, human security, climate-friendly industries and services, sustainable energy, and knowledge and capacity development as the seven primary outcomes of the NCCAP. So the counterpart of the NCCAP at the local level is the Local Climate Change Action Plan, wherein LGUs are mandated to submit to the DILG. Then we also have the Philippine Development Plan. So the PDP outlines the country's development policies for achieving inclusive growth, a high trust and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy, all of which are based on this vision. So, excuse me, climate-related policies and initiatives are discussed in the 11 chapters of the PTP 2017 to 2022, which support the goal of building resilient communities and reducing poverty. So these initiatives support climate resilient infrastructure, energy efficient technology, forest restoration, and improved catastrophe and climate related sickness health services. So what are the some of the identified gaps or challenges in terms of addressing climate change at the local level? So first, we have limited or lack of climate change vulnerability assessments, especially in areas where sea level rise is susceptible. And because of these, oftentimes or most often than not, the submission of quality local climate change action plans, comprehensive land use plans, and even annual investment plans are compromised. And there is a need to strike a balance among these plans to ensure that programs, projects, and plans that will be implemented by the cities and municipalities will have an long-term climate change adaptation measures and strategies. Then there is also seen challenge on the enforcement or implementation of environment-related laws. So the Philippines, all as we see or as we know, have sound environmental laws, but the challenge has always been in the implementation, both at the national and the local level. And then lastly, we have limited awareness and capacity building among LGUs and communities of the impacts of climate change, especially slow onset events such as sea level rise. So there's still seen need to mainstream and capacitate the LGUs in terms of uh, climate change adaptation and mitigation. So some recommendations. So there is a need to incorporate fit for purpose adaptation solutions in the implementation of projects or plans to adapt to the impending impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise. So as you see at the right side of your screen, these are different types of responses to coastal risk and sea level rise as provided by the IPCC in 2019. So let me discuss some of these. So first we have the protection. So protection reduces coastal risk and impacts by blocking the inland propagation and other effects of mean or extreme sea levels. So this includes hard protections, which includes the building of dikes, seawalls, breakwaters, barriers, and barrages, among others. Then we also have sediment-based protection, such as beach and shore nourishment. And we also have ecosystem-based adaptation as part of protection. Then we also have accommodation. So accommodation includes diverse biophysical and institutional responses that mitigate coastal risk and impacts by reducing the vulnerability of coastal residents, human activities, ecosystems, and the built environment, thus enabling the habitability of coastal zones despite increasing levels of hazard occurrence. So some accommodation measures for erosion and flooding include building codes. Then we also have raising house elevation, lifting valuables to higher floors, and floating houses and gardens. Then some accommodation measures for salinity intrusion include changes in land use or changes to salt-tolerant crop varieties. Then we also have advance. So advance creates new land by building seaward, reducing coastal risk for the hinterland and the newly elevated land. So this includes land reclamation above sea levels by land filling with pumped sand or other fill material, planting vegetation within the specific intention to support natural accretion of land, and surrounding low areas with dikes, termed polarization, which also requires drainage and often pumping systems. Then we have retreat. So retreat reduces coastal risk by moving exposed people, assets, and human activities out of the coastal hazard zone. So this includes migration. So migration is the voluntary, permanent, or semi-permanent movement by a person at least for 1 year. Then we also have displacement. So displacement is the involuntary and unforeseen movement of people due to natural and human-induced disasters. And lastly, we have relocation. So relocation or resettlement is a managed retreat or managed realignment, which is typically initiated and facilitated by the government from the national to local levels, and it usually involves small sites and or communities. And lastly, we have ecosystem-based adaptation as a type of response to SLR. So ecosystem-based adaptation responses provide a combination of protect and advance benefits based on the sustainable management, conservation, and restoration of ecosystems. So examples include conservation or restoration of coastal ecosystems such as wetlands and reefs. To conclude my presentation, so climate change threatens human security as it undermines livelihoods, compromises culture and individual identity, increases migration that people would rather have avoided, challenges the ability of states to provide the conditions necessary for human security. So changes in climate may influence some or all of the factors at the same time. Situations of acute insecurity such as famine, conflict, and socio-political instability almost always emerge from the interaction of multiple factors. For many populations that are already socially marginalized, resource-dependent, and have limited capital assets, human security will be progressively undermined as the climate changes. So as the global temperature continues to rise, long-term actions shall be developed or need to be developed and implemented to address the continuing threat of sea level rise. Climate change does not acknowledge boundaries, and therefore collaborative and concerted efforts are needed to confront these challenges. So that ends my presentation. Thank you, everyone.